proprietary rabbit holes.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, so using the CIC model as a reference point for discussing.
What was the blue box?
The blue box is in that model is a networked economic model. It's one where you view the economy as made up of. In fact, in theory, it's individuals, but in practice, you need to make it a cohort model, geographic and industry segmentations into subpopulations, and then the financial mixing process is a graph mixing process. So money flows along edges between these subpopulations or within the sub. Yeah. So it has like an internal mixing rate.
Wait, but then what's the pink box?
The pink box is the operator, and so in a lot of decentralized systems, this doesn't really exist. But in the current existence of CICs, there's a non-trivial community operator. It's an institutional entity, grassroots economics in this case, that's like literally operating the policies. It's different from the policies on the bonding curve. They are saying, when you sign up, you get this disbursement, and under the following conditions, we are going to cash you out. But those people aren't cashing out against the bonding curve. They're actually cashing out against the operator, so and the operator is cashing out potentially.
On this, so then are you saying that we won't be able to use the grassroots model very much? Or I mean, I guess
no, I'm saying that the grassroots model scope ended up being about the relationship between three boxes, only one of which is the bonding curve. But the bonding curve implementation is the same bonding curve implementation. It just has symmetric fees. Instead of only having a one-way fee where you charge people when they exit, the model itself has two directional. You have fees. And again, actually, you can set the fee to 0, but they were working against these Bancor version of the contracts, and so we made a model of what we call the green box, which was the smart contract, and the model that we implemented in cadcat reflects the properties of the contracts that the grassroots economics team was using. But we were very much focused on understanding how to make that super system sustainable, where the system is the smart contract, the operator, and the community that actually is spending the money, and those operational KPIs and that operational model was, for me, largely driven by the requirements that came out of our discussions with Adam and Will.
Just on the process of when you do the ABC bonding curve model, will you actually start with the grassroots model and then build off of it?
Probably not.
No, you will start from scratch.
Probably less likely scratch and more from the versions of the cadcat models that I had written for some of the papers. They're a bit outdated and they need to be updated. But remember, I wrote 2 papers on bonding curves and I have cadcat models for them.
Okay.
So yeah, I would probably start from the economic games as estimators and the curve bonding configuration spaces papers and the cadcat models that I wrote for those.
And then since we're going to connect to conviction voting, will you also just kind of loop in the conviction voting model?
I think that would probably need to be a different. I think we would need to segment things away. We need to do we've been working really hard to build a good module around conviction voting that helps people understand the design pattern, how it works, what the parameters are, and how to work with it. And my expectation would be to take that component module and mirror the way that we approached it. So we would want to build something similar, focusing on bonding curves as a design pattern, but we would need to do it in similar level of fidelity to the conviction voting one, and that we would want to from a research collateral perspective, we build off the models that I had previously made for those 2 academic papers.
Okay. So then, with this bonding curve model, do you think that we will try to focus it on like a generalized bonding curve implementation, and then like when we're actually constructing the model, and then just apply it to the augmented bonding curve, or so that the model is like a little larger scope?
I don't mind that. I don't mind having the model be a more general version than an implementation, but there needs to be an implementation which is at least a subset of that design. I don't want to give people a generalized model and then say, yeah, but someone needs to code it. I want to be able to give them a generalized model and say at least some subset or some instances of this model are available to you today. And so for that, I'm also inclined to, actually regroup with Luke and some others who have been involved in the discussions around the generalized bonding curves to make sure that what we do build this around that is something we can also point people to an implementation so that they're not just like, oh, I want to do that, and then sorry, too bad.
Okay, so you know what? Before we go too much further on the ABC, let me just go through the like roadmap that we're looking at, and I sent you a link, but I can also just share screen too.
Yeah, that might be good if you're actually live streaming. The screen share is helpful.
Yeah. So, not that one. That one. So the idea is that we would start with if we need more. So for our fundraise, we may want to start with, and once we have the CSAX token DApp up and everything, which is coming along, we might start with if the TE Commons needs some money. We might, to make sure that we can finish that prototype, basically. We might raise some funds there. And then we're going to go and make sure that cadcat gets funding. So that
I mean, cadcat's tricky. I mean, do you want to go through the roadmap first, or do you want to talk about the cadcat stuff?
Well, let's stay at a high over.
Okay.
We can come back to cadcat, but basically, like to me, it makes sense to kind of make a really strong push for cadcat because it's one of the harder things to fund, and you know, that way it gets more issuance. But the idea, you know, I think Jeff interviewed you a little bit and got the download, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But then once we have cadcat funding, because honestly, it feels to me like a bad idea to invest a lot of energy into making cadcat models if the cadcat infrastructure gets less funding than models using it.
Oh, you know? yeah. Look, I think there's a lot to talk about in that bucket. So I mean, I'm fine with going through this and then coming back around with it, but I want to give you the sort of paint the picture of like what's hard about that and what we're doing, because we're actually we continue to spend a shit ton of money just to build and open source that shit. And there are definitely some bottlenecks, and obviously we're constrained by our own resources. We have lots of projects. We can't take the opportunity costs of pulling people off of paid projects to do just development, but we do have some dedicated resources that are working on it, and it's important to understand what that looks like and, you know, what it's going to take for cadcat as its own, you know, decentralized organization or its own the open source org to take off, because that's where part of the bottleneck is. We're in the middle of, I would call it an exit to community, in the sense that, you know, cadcat started as an internal tool, then it became an internal tool with a private beta, then it became an internal tool that we shared through open source license, and now it's a tool that we transferred ownership to a GitHub organization that is not owned by Block Science. So it is in fact an open source tool. Now, keep in mind that almost everyone who works on it regularly is still paid by Block Science. So we still have a lot of control over it, because literally the maintainers get paid by us for their salaries. So, but that doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever, and we know it's not going to be, and we don't want it to be. So we're trying to transition from, you know, we are maintaining it now indirectly to it's actually a community-owned project. Yeah,
which is going to be a hard transition, but
it's a slow transition. I mean, hard isn't even the right word. It just takes time, and we're just, you know, one of the challenges is
investing you need to invest in people who will be there, right, to kind of hand it over.
Well, we need to invest in the organization. Like, there's an understanding of, you know, people joke about follow the money, right? So right now, if you were to follow the money, Block Science pays everyone who works on it on a regular basis. So even though it's a community built org, it's still nowhere near the level of decentralization or community ownership that I want it to get to. And so one of the most important pathways there is just get to a community manager and maybe a maintainer, or like at least, you know, one person on at least one person who doesn't actually work for Block Science, but actually is, you know, the steward and community member / developer and contributor, however that you know, one or more role works out, that's actually their allegiance is literally to the project, not to an entity that's funding the development of the project.
Yeah, exactly. It's like React versus Facebook. But But we'll get there. So then, and hopefully at the end, if there's time, that'll probably be, I think this is the one I understand the best, but so we'll probably have to save that for the last.
Okay.
So, and after we fund cadcat, then the next thing that we want to get funding for is the community competition. The other thing is just timing. Like, we need time to finish the TE Commons. So, you know, it's before we really start pushing these other ones, and even finishing the TE Commons isn't done when it's launched. So, you know, it's like we'll have to, there'll be some effort there. But anyway, so then we do the community competition for the next Commons and get the funding so that we can actually spend the time making sure that really good communities are applying and understand what what they're even applying for to be the next field test. And then, of course, funding the actual like cultural build that we're doing for the TE Commons. You know, it'll be a lot easier because we all have playbooks and we'll have things. We're not making it all up from scratch because we did it once. So that'll be the next thing that we raise for. And then after that, this is where I really need a lot of feedback from you on simulating the Commons, which was what we've been talking right now, which is basically making another module for the ABC, but with like just like conviction voting, but for the bonding curve. And then probably, you know, hopefully being able to combine it with the conviction voting and actually, like, you know, trying to choose parameters for the Commons based on who they are and what they actually, you know, what their values are, and making sure that as much of the information about them, that's why this has to come first, picking who they are and understanding who they are, that stuff gets into not only the an actual module that's usable for everyone, but, you know, something that fits the use case in implementation, right? And then the next thing that we would raise for would be the generalized bonding curve implementation. At least that's what I want to propose, instead of just, you know, a one-off for this field test Commons. It's like, let's fund the generalized bonding curve implementation that everyone can use for bonding curves and make it match this model. And then, so after those two things get funded, I mean, like, you know, this is the fundraise focus on this roadmap. But then, you know, once they get funded, then we need to hire, we need to like get a project manager to make sure this whole thing gets actually finished, and, you know, interview vendors and all this stuff. So it's not all going to start right away.
Yeah, but I mean, I think one of the challenges that I'm seeing here with a lot of this stuff in the roadmap is that it's still, like, these are big design and development projects, and I'm still, part of my experience has been that they get accomplished more collaboratively. Like, this is, in a way, this is a very centralized but traditional engineering approach, and I was with you when we were writing out the original version of this. And we wrote it from a very much like, you imagine an existing engineering institutional approach to design, development, test, deploy. And what I've been seeing in the last, you know, year and a half is that we've made a lot of progress in a slightly more bottom-up way. Now, that's not to say that this is bad or that we're not going to be able to do this, but that, like, we made a lot of progress on conviction voting by just doing it. Now, we need people to fund it. We need, like, you know, whether it's Block Science or Common Stack or OneHive or whomever, we need the money. It's just a question of how it's presented. I still feel like now one of our biggest challenges with this kind of roadmap is that it's big numbers, big amounts of time, and a lot of centralized orchestration of resources, which, again, it works in the engineering world. No joke. No complaints if you were able to get all that money and put it in a bucket and put a program manager in place and do all the engineering steps, we'd have a kick-ass output. But what I'm seeing is that it doesn't necessarily align with the zeitgeist, and it doesn't necessarily align with what people are feeling and doing. And so it feels to me like we need to find ways to do, like, smaller chunks of work, not necessarily in the sense that the work is less. It's more that, like, I found it really, really productive to do, you know, a 50K or 100K project, and, like, the outputs of it are awesome, and they compound on each other, and people see them, and more people get involved, and more communities or sub-projects get involved, and things just start to proliferate. And so rather than having this, like, big waterfall is like the way that it feels, having something a bit more like a cascade. And we accomplish the cascade by grabbing, you know, what I would say is having this big vision, but then grabbing at the next half dozen things and finding the people, and even almost like finding the vendors before finding the money, and then working with the vendor to define the scope and bringing the money behind it. And again, not against raising larger sums if we can get it, but my instincts are that a lot of the progress is made when, and again, this is my personality type, I just say, fuck raising money, I'm gonna raise labor, let's see what we can build. And if we succeed in building something, then more people will build stuff and more people will give us money. And like when I look at this roadmap now, it feels to me like it's still caught up in this, this, again, literally, I helped you write this in the first place, so this is a revision of my own opinion. Right? And
this is the fundraise roadmap. It's not the doing it roadmap, right? So like if we get to this point and we can actually, you know, I mean, it's also coming with this idea that, okay, there is a bull market. Uniswap just dropped like $400 million somehow on you know, they instantiated $400 million.
Yeah,
and just gave it to everyone yesterday. And this is gonna be the standard for the next, you know, 6 months.
I do understand that it's a bull market, and I am all for, like, to be honest with you, I think that in a bull market, people have more money than they know what to do with, and I would love it if they put it in public goods.
Exactly.
I'm just saying, like, my biggest learning since we first did the Common Stack roadmap and planning has been that I spend less time trying to get people to give me money, more time trying to build stuff, and then I find that the effort spent building something results in more money than the effort spent asking for money.
Absolutely. And I assume like this is going to be, I mean, you're already working on this. Jeff is already, we got the people in place, right? Like it's all it's all there.
Yeah, but some of it is pacing and some of it is like.
This is a little harder. You know, this one, making the conviction voting module, we need to just pay you guys to do it.
So yes and no. I mean, for starters, I feel like I say yes and no because obviously, if I could just throw down and do put a team on it, spend a few months, just be done, we would produce outputs like we did with the conviction voting module. And even that one, actually, to be honest, the project was a little short. We're trying to do a bit more. We think there's more things that we can add to it to make it valuable. And we also have an internal plan to iterate on it, to learn from the real data, from the real pilots. So, you know, in some ways they're also ongoing. But if we think of it as a spike and we wanted to put 3 months of a dedicated team on it to produce a, you know, model that would become the source of truth for the design pattern of bonding curves, then yeah, I think that would be intensely valuable, and that we should ultimately find a way to bring in the money, spin up the project. And just to be clear, though, the one that we did on conviction voting wasn't totally out of the blue. Like, Aragon funded it. Like, Block Science subsidized it. Like, I feel like OneHive and Block Science both kind of subsidized it, but then in terms of, like, being able to pay people, you know, Aragon did pay. So, like, there's some opportunity out there for the money to exist, to pay people to do this work and to produce these artifacts. And I'm hoping that with regards to the bonding curve, the ABC in particular, that the existence of the academic papers as the sort of content and the existence of some of the cadcat models can help keep that focused on the module rather than the model. We talked about this before, right? The model already exists. The mathematics, some cadcat implementations, etc. Same was true for conviction voting.
And we
spent that time building out the education.
Though. That's the two pieces of this. You know, I see this as two pieces. There's the module that anyone can use because it's this beautiful README and has all the pieces and parts that you can interact with and then there is the model for this specific community that is tuned for them.
Sure, and that's like what we kind of did though in that module was use an existing use case in order to motivate it. So like, again, with conviction voting, we were really interacting closely with OneHive in order to understand their implementation, in order to make sure that our modules examples were real world examples, not just theoretical ones. So I think there's a nice parity between like doing the models, but then running scenarios and talking about like how to actually tune parameters and give people some insights in how it's done, even without telling them they have to pick these numbers. That shows them the story of the thing from the perspective of an entity that also picked those numbers. And I like that you have the 20K to grassroots econ for reimburse. I don't think there's much overlap, but I honestly think that project needs money. Like I think that it's right now, I see it from my perspective as frustratingly constrained, because I think there's a lot of good things that can happen there, and that they're not happening because of money's flowing into all sorts of stuff, DeFi, whatnot. And as an operating organization, Block Science doesn't have much of a choice but to focus energy where we're getting paid, because we have to pay people.
Of course.
But I really wish that there was more funding going to them and to projects like them. So, if you're able to orient it that way, I think it wouldn't be a terrible idea to sort of have sort of a kickback into that ecosystem as a, really more of a feed forward. It's more of a feed forward than a feedback, because I don't think they line up as much as you might have thought, but I still think it's worth doing.
Okay, well that's good. Okay, so then once these things, when we gather the funding, it's not like, okay, now project manager, now we're building this from scratch. No, it's like money goes into a Giveth campaign, and we allocate it as we need to, and it sits there to make sure that this thing can happen. It doesn't have to be the classic waterfall like project management flow.
I understand, but that was a comment more about, it's a little bit more of a comment about narratives. Like, I know how we would do these things, and that they wouldn't necessarily play out in quite such a waterfall way. I'm talking about the presentation and the way that this
will never be presented. This is an internal document.
Okay, that's fair. But then I'm cautioning that, if this is an internal document that helps us scaffold and plan, and that's great, when we go to transform the content for narrative purposes, we need to do a better job highlighting the raising labor aspects of it. Like, this is the potential sum of the cost of the work as budgeted, but it might not come to common stack raising and paying these numbers. It might just mean that some way or another, that much money worth, it's like money as a measure of work here, and that some way or another someone is going to donate time, or an organization might donate time, or someone might put money in, or they might pay their own staff to do something. And that, because again, my experience has been that, unfortunately, we've had to subsidize a lot of our public goods work ourselves, but we do it because we believe in it. And then in some cases, that work is being subsidized by our collaborators, where other people who are just doing these public goods things because they need to get done. And in some cases, an organization has paid to do a project where the outputs are going into the open source domain. And big hat tip to the Interchain Foundation, who put a lot of put a big project in the
Alpha bonds.
The Alpha bond stuff. And we're still working on getting that wrapped up, but it's open, like the work is.
And it seems like Alpha bonds is pretty, is that something that we would use a little bit of too?
So the Alpha bonds is higher up the stack. So Alpha bonds are actually compositions of multiple mechanisms, including prediction markets in with bonding curve. So in fact, much like, and this is happening repeatedly, a bonding curve is really a really basic concept. It's really just a binding or a bond between two things. It creates an interface. And once you see it as that kind of general design pattern, I talked to Trent about this a long time ago now. We were talking about it as an interface, or like an adapter pattern. Once you realize that you have lots of things going on, it's really important to understand how adapter patterns work to connect things to each other. And so what ends up happening is something like the Alpha bonds, they have a bonding curve.
Sorry, I'm in a garage.
No worries. They have a bonding curve as a subsystem, but then they have another. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
They have a prediction market like subsystem, and the two things are wired together. And then they have higher order properties that we sort of test and analyze, and they have parameters that are interacting with each other. And there's a lot to sort out. But when similarly to what I was saying about the grassroots economics work, it's less that work is going to be reused. It's more that they shared the same dependency. The grassroots economics work depended on the fact that we had these existing models and cadcat models of bonding curves. The alpha bonds work depended on the fact that we had those existing modules. But what we have never done is sort of productize that knowledge itself. Similar, again, to the Aragon conviction voting model. The goal of that project wasn't to develop a new design pattern. The goal of that project was to bring together and clearly document and present a package to help people understand the design pattern, to engage with that design pattern, to help bring it to bear for themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back. So we are, okay, so once we have those things, then we'll just throw a little bit money at Giveth to make sure that we can ideally use the escrow service with this model. So
I think the escrow service is going to be important. I think even with the OneHive group, if you look carefully right now, the funds are essentially automatically going to whoever they pass, and the integration of say a conviction voting or any other resource provisioning algorithm with a sort of resource management tool is super important. So I think insofar as Giveth is being improved, another important thing to analyze is and facilitate is composability with other mechanisms. How to use Giveth with any number of other tools that are going to be used to collect and steward funds for a community.
Yeah, I mean, and this would be like the small chunk, but the big chunk would be in the next round where we try to make sure that donations affect conviction voting and this sort of thing, which who knows, maybe this ends up when we actually present this, we're not going to show anyone any of these. We're only going to show them the one that we're on now, you know? Sure. So it's we're initializing the cadcat thing now. This is internal. This is for us to know where we're going, but we might change. And what we're going to focus on is right now, TE Commons. Next one, cadcat, and then that's what people will see. It's oh yeah, we need to support cadcat.
So then maybe, initialized cadcat team might be better framed as cadcat exit to community. What we're basically, because again, the cadcat team exists. There are a lot of people working on and with cadcat. We're trying to improve both the demo models, the tutorials. We have Joshua.
I made a tweet yesterday that said this exact same thing. Yeah. Cadcat's exit to the community.
Yeah. There's like I said, we're trying to work on quick start guides and better onboarding tools. It's well understood right now that unfortunately cadcat has two levels of audience covered. One is the very technical, low level, how the engine works and the sort of generalized dynamical systems mathematical framework that it builds upon is pretty well documented, but that's way beyond what most people want. They just say how do I use it? I want to use it. Yeah. And then the other end, there's sort of this business developy sort of, Jonathan level of hey, you should use this, digital twins are important, check out the Gartner hype cycle, all the this is the thing you need to do, which is not wrong. It's actually super important that people understand system modeling and its relationship to data science and all this stuff. But at the same time, that's that's shilling. That's not helping you actually do it. And that middle layer needs to be filled in.
This has been bugging me for a long time. Do you capitalize cadcad when it's the beginning of a sentence?
I don't.
Okay, that's cool. I assume not, but
I try not to start sentences with it though because it bothers me.
Yeah, same. I'm in the same spot. Anyway, okay. So and then the last one that we want to raise funds for is I'm assuming that we will just need to guess what's stuck. You know what? Our module for the ABC it's not good enough. We need some extra funding. And then we basically have just at the end.
I wouldn't even call it it's essentially the inevitable need to, hey, we launched some stuff, we're testing it, things get stuck, you're pulling off data. Whenever you have the opportunity to build something, you're going to test it. And whenever you test it, you're going to see things that need to be improved or cleaned up. Yeah. It's just this, that's essentially the budget for any sort of additional, hey, we observe, just say, okay, the thing is never going to be perfect. So by definition, there's going to be a list of action items. And the idea is that you stack rank the action items, you do as many of them as you can, and anything else spills over.
And this is all, of course, for a real project, right? Kind of like how you did Honey. It's Honey was the thing that you did for Honey was this step, but we're funding the full Honey project to be launched.
Yeah.
And this is that last step of not only launching it and making sure that they have everything to launch safely.
Although you don't have this here, I think one of the highest priority things is integrating with the sort of Uniswap or the automated market makers or just the market model. Because you really can't understand the system without that. Though keep in mind that we already do have an implementation in cadcat of the Uniswap implementation, and we use it and we play around with it. We're looking right now at, you know, one of our outstanding action items we really want to spend some time on is integrating that cadcat model of Uniswap with the existing conviction voting model of the Honey system, because it actually has one already. So there's real data about it. So insofar as we want to integrate a real data observations about the Honey DAO, we could keep it the OneHive DAO. We can also look at it in the context of its market and
I mean, that'll be a question of whether or not these tokens that are created are transferable for Uniswap, right? And that's there's a lot of open questions.
I brought it up though because in the case of Honey, which is really our, I won't call it a straw man because it's real, but the great thing about working with OneHive is that there's a real thing, and we don't want to get caught up in imagine things work like this when we have an example right in front of us where it's working, and we can help iterate and refine and improve.
Well, the example for us will be the token engineering commons.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Should be working.
No, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that or that it's got to be Honey. I'm just pointing out that we are learning how to do this better not by theorizing about how to do this better, but by engaging directly with a partner and making sure that we are learning how to bring the outcomes in the world, not just how to talk about them, which unfortunately is sort of endemic to a lot of things that attempt to answer big questions get stuck in the forest and don't get into the trees. But then a lot of people who are good at building get stuck in the trees and can't see the forest. And for me, it remains the case that the goal of Common Stack is to bridge those two viewpoints.
Yeah, for sure. And produce these things for everyone to use. I mean, that's this would be a lot cheaper if we were just doing one-offs. You know, we wouldn't care about cadcat.
I can tell you exactly what one-offs look like because I make a living by doing a lot of this kind of work for specific projects. The idea that we want this to be a knowledge commons and it to be something that has open source design patterns and implementations and places to go to learn about the concepts, that's all a question of how do we take it from, oh, well, if you want to do this, the only option is to go call Block Science or a half dozen other maybe hyper-specialized groups or people. And now we're saying, no, like this is so important. It needs to be something that anyone who's willing to invest the time and energy to learn it and do it can. Yeah.
And then the other thing that's worth mentioning here on this roadmap is that the way that we fund the core operations of Common Stack is that a percentage of this, I'm just ballparking 20% of each of these raises would just go to us as part of the raise.
And that's how you're going to staff your like, you know, I mean, you need to have an operational unit, but you do also have to try to be lean about that. I think one of the things that I've noticed is that it can be kind of challenging. You guys are pretty process heavy. Not that process is bad, because obviously we're here designing a bunch of things and we care about people's input. It's just like finding the Pareto point is really hard because we have to figure out like what's enough it back and forth to make sure everybody's being heard out. But unfortunately, sometimes, it may sound backward, sometimes being too inclusive or putting too much process to try to facilitate input actually has the opposite effect, because you put so much process in that certain people select out because they don't have the time or the energy to participate in the process. So you're actually creating a selection function despite the fact that you're trying to create an inclusion function.
Yeah, no, for sure.
You just got to be careful about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited to remove a lot of our I think we're in the process of removing a lot of our processes and changing things up, and it's feeling a lot better these days. But we'll see how it goes. We're also, hiring, trying to hire like mad. So that helps us shake up our processes. We lost Chris, by the way. He needed a break. So.
I heard. I mean, look, like, the other thing that I find that is super compelling is that none of these projects, including block science, really like owns anybody's time, right? So like we've had some cycling where people work with us, they go from full-time to part-time, or they go back from part-time to full-time, or they go build a new project or build a new company for all that it matters. And the result of that actually, I think in the long run is healthier. Like, obviously you need some retention in order to function, but otherwise like some rotation is also actually really healthy.
I think so too. You get stuck in your ways. But anyway, so with this general concept, like simulating for building the simulation so that it's tuned for one community, but has like clear openings for a generalized bonding curve, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what I was saying about how we approach conviction voting module. Like, you need to both have examples of real things and the general representations. And the point of the module is to describe the relationship between the sort of class and the instance. The idea that here's a family of things, here's an example of one of those things. If you can't present those two things together, people won't understand the class-instance relationship or the design pattern-design relationship, right? A design pattern is not a design. Like, a design is a specific set of choices, whereas a design pattern is a class or a family of designs that share certain properties.
Okay. Okay, so then, okay, that's cool. Then for the tuning and the actual model, you were saying, I mean, I guess later I can try to get some kind of back of the envelope quote that maybe has async.
If you're talking about the bonding curves and the stuff that we have a lot to build on, yeah, I mean, I'm saying that's like probably like 75 to 100, assuming that's a 3-month project and I have to put a standard team on it, and we have the inputs already. Like, obviously we have a lot of knowledge about these things. I think we try to keep it on the low side, but like, ultimately, at this point, we're doing almost all of our contracting on sort of capacity planning basis. Like, we bring on a new deal, we figure out when it is, we figure out when our resources are free, we figure out what our resources are costing us.
And that's the other thing. What if you had to give me some kind of heads up on like how long in advance we need to book you?
I don't have a good answer for that. Like, right now, obviously this stuff, much like the conviction voting work, will be, prioritized in the sense that obviously it's work I've been deeply invested in for a long time. But in practice, what ends up having to happen is that we have commitments, we have people paying us, and we just have to open up our schedule, figure out who's busy, who's not busy. And to your earlier point, like, we are hiring and growing and looking for opportunities to grow. And so, stuff that's related to bonding curves is actually a really good place for me to put, staff that is relatively early, because the more time I've spent on it and the more I've been like, I have these papers, I have whole academic papers, and I use these same papers to teach new staff anyway. Right? So when somebody comes on, one of the first things I do is bombard them with a bunch of our existing papers and existing models and say, hey, understand these, ask me questions, let me teach you the concepts. So if we're building modules around those same ones, it's a little bit more flexible for me to do that work with, newer staff members, and not necessarily having to have someone like Barlin, who's been working with us for 3 years, be the lead. But if
so then like 3 months would be more than enough time. Because you could hire a couple people.
Yeah. So for example, in a case like this, to be fair, it's very difficult to hire. So like finding people who are qualified is super hard. And we do have a little bit of run up. We can't just throw them at the project the day they join. We probably need to, put them in a slightly more apprenticeship role on another project and make sure that they get up to snuff and that they can, work on this with me. But yeah,
but if I say, hey, it looks like
3 months lead, and especially if you were able to lock in, if you had the funding and we were like essentially like signing a contract and booking it like we would with anything else, then yeah, I mean, we just get it on the books, we'd make sure that we get it staffed, and we do it like any other client project. We make a commitment and we would do it. And
3 months would be on average probably more than
3 months is enough time that I think that even if I didn't have capacity when you came and asked me and you said, hey, with 3 months from now, can you start? I would be able to potentially even find a new resource, upskill that resource and put them on the project
Okay.
within 3 months.
And so hopefully it would be quicker, but at least
And it very well might be. I do have right now a group, some people who I've been talking to, and like I'm exploring. The thing is, hiring is just super fucking tricky.
Of course.
And so like I try really hard to take much more of a sort of, this sort of, novice, apprentice, expert, master model where people they come in at whatever level they're at. And then their goal is to upskill, and like we help put them on projects according to their skill level and pair them with people according to their skill level to make sure that we continue to meet like any service level agreements, that we provide high quality work. But that means that we have to load balance across, people's expertise levels in addition to their domains of expertise.
Yeah, and just to confirm, to change the topic a little bit, for generalized bonding curve model, that's the way we should go. We shouldn't try to just build an augmented bonding curve model. We should really double down on.
Yeah,
not model, but implementation.
Yeah, so I think that that's pretty badly needed. That's been an ongoing discussion between me and Luke and actually Jem and others from the other subsets of this sort of the DAO ecosystems. Where like it's kind of widely known that the existing family of fundraising applications is a little weak. Not weak in the sense that it's bad, just like the first batch of the Aragon Dico software didn't really meet the mark. Similar applications out of other groups are sort of like kind of fills the use case, but again, like I personally think that there's room for us to create a more generalized model, which is a family of designs with some parameters that allows for the vast majority of use cases, and that if those collective groups who decide to participate in the design jams to result in this more general design and the sort of family of parameters and use cases it fits, then that like one way or another, those groups would have access to the teams to do the implementations, which themselves might just be forks of existing implementations, but to generalize them to the point that this meets this broader class of designs, and that the modules required to help people use those parameters to construct viable systems is also important. And that we can't just build a generalized bonding curve model because it adds degrees of freedom, makes it a little bit harder to tune and use, so it has to be paired with the documentation and education about how to put it to good use.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Then I would say let's spend at least 10 minutes on giving an update on the token engineering commons. Things are going actually pretty well. There's the biggest thing that's killing us. I think things are going well, but the thing that's really killing us is the misunderstanding that we're trying to be basically like build something like TE creds, versus we're trying, where it's like, this is for the token engineering community, It's like that, and
well, they're completely different things, and I think there's a lot of issues with it's fucking crypto, and people don't understand institutions. So if the token engineering community, not the token engineering commons thing that you're building, not the token engineering cred thing, what I'm talking about is the community, the people. Ignore everything else to start. Now let's build up different kinds of infrastructures. So smart contracts, they're technical infrastructure. Money is that belongs to the community is a common pool resource. The infrastructure is a kind of common pool resource. You have to start like looking at this, and I'm gonna now for the moment talk about the whole community as a commons, not the thing that you're calling the token engineering commons.
And that's the biggest. This is the biggest confusion.
This is an ontological issue, and it needs to be addressed. So starters, top humans, they're just people who want to do token engineering. They don't want to do processes of governing themselves. They need to because they exist, but they don't. That is not a goal for them. The point is not to do governance for governance own sake. They want to do stuff, learn stuff, teach stuff, build stuff. Step one, that's the user is the community, and what the community wants is to do stuff. Step one. Now, that community may have any number of common pool resources. One common pool resource is capital belonging to that community that it can steer. And that is something that you are working on. Another common pool resource would be a tool for attributing credit to each other, whether it's a cred, a TE cred or a praise bot or whatever. The infrastructure, the technical tooling that facilitates that is a common pool resource. It belongs to that community. Then any number of other things that are, think of them as whether they are infrastructure, whether they are money, whether they are, it doesn't matter what, but anything that you can think of as belonging to the community is a common pool resource. The process of producing, maintaining, guiding, etc., that is commoning. Like the term is like literally they are the collective stewardship of those common pool resources. In an ontological sort of institutional sense, the commons broadly is the collection of those people, the processes for managing those common pool resources, the common pool resources themselves. So from a pure definition standpoint, the token engineering commons would be that whole thing. Now, what you're calling the token engineering commons is actually a subset. It's a specific common pool resource, which is a piece of infrastructure, some smart contracts, some assets that are held within those, and the processes and procedures for managing that thing. So your token engineering commons is actually a subset of the token engineering commons in the sort of institutional definition. There are other subsets. And the concern is that I think people are getting confused because they don't necessarily have that whole ontology in their head. And they're like, oh, wait, is it the commons or is it the commons? And what about these other common pool resources? And what about these other things that we're doing? How do they fit into that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's been a constant battle. And it's really the biggest conflict that we have or the thing slowing us down is getting people to come around to this idea that this is actually a project like the Token Engineering Academy that has its own demands, or the book that has its own demands, and that's what we're working on.
You have to be able to put it on the same level, because my feeling is that the confusion might arise between this sort of the Token Engineering Commons, the component, and the Token Engineering Commons, the thing that is the superset of all of those things. And until you can sort of again, and I don't mean that you're doing anything wrong. I just
no, we're clearly doing something wrong because we haven't been able to get. Even though I try every week to tell everyone, it's not sinking in.
Let me. What I would suggest.
I don't. Okay, yeah.
Well, what I would suggest is to take that what we just talked about and try to make it into a diagram or make it into a short post and like give people something that so it's not just a conversation. Conversations are really easy for people to have, like everyone has a slightly different perspective and they can agree and disagree, and there's a lot of room for discussion, which is healthy and good, but what you need is a mimetic shelling point. And the way that you produce a mimetic shelling point is to say, you know, in my opinion, the token engineering commons in the sense of all of the common pool resources, all of the community members, and all of the processes being undertaken together as as one thing. Then you can say, under that umbrella, the book and the academy and the creds and anything that anyone cares about. And in that list, you put your token engineering commons, because your token engineering commons, the thing you're calling the token engineering commons, is actually a piece of infrastructure for managing capital resources, which we know that people have a lot of ideological reasons for like not wanting to have the capital resources be the only kind of value. They're also a necessary kind of value. This community needs capital resources, but we have to distinguish capital resources from being one of many forms of value within that institution, from people feeling like maybe you're conflating the whole commons with its capital resources.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I regret the name commons, full on. Like, we really just need to call it a DAO and move on, because then
I don't know that DAO is better, but I think that you could revisit naming that component as a way of signaling to everyone that you've heard them. But if you were to make the diagram that I just described and call the whole thing
I mean, we can't go back in time, so we have to hold on, though. So I'm not going to try to rename it or anything unless someone demanded it.
I don't agree with that. I think that in practice, if the name is the part of what's causing the confusion, then one of the fastest ways to reconcile it, it might not be to do it all at once, but if you start by making this diagram, you see the commons and the commons, then suddenly the confusion is elucidated. The natural solution might be, hey, maybe we learned that calling this a commons was confusing because really, from technically speaking, the bigger circle is the commons. What should we call this to make this less confusing for others in the future becomes a question to the community to help facilitate everyone ingesting this misunderstanding.
I think once it's launched, it will be really easy to be like, oh yeah, that's the common. They're the things funding all of the common pool resources, right? But until it's launched,
I understand. I helped pick that name. I liked that name. I am literally saying we have learned something. This is causing confusion. What do you do when you learn? Like, it's a bug in your code. It's a bug in your institutional code. I'm saying we might need a bug fix. The first thing is to identify the bug and write an issue. Writing the issue is drawing the diagram, going to everyone and saying, oh, wow, we're confused because we're saying A and it's not clear whether we mean A or B. So what do we do about it?
Yeah. So and that's where we are now, and we're working on it for sure. And a diagram is a great idea. And but we're actually in the process. So like everything looks pretty well complete. We're working on an onboarding guide, and then we're ready to start working groups. We have identified like 7 working groups that we want to start. We have a process for paying people. Basically, we're creating this cultural build tribute so that kind of like a percentage of the hatch tokens that are created will go to people who participated in creating the whole system in the first place. So that's a nice, and then we just use praise to and quantify the praise every 2 weeks in a completely open, transparent way. And then we translate praise, the qualitative praise gets quantified into impact hours. And then each impact hour will be valued the same, but it depends. I mean, we still have to do like the design on this, exactly how it relates to the hatch. But the idea is that as the hatch grows, the impact hour value grows. So if the hatch raises more money, then the value of one impact hour also goes up, but also the percentage of the cultural build tribute goes down. So it's one of these things where as we raise more money, the people who are donating give less of a percent to the people who build, but the people who build get more impact hour value. So it's so at least incentives are aligned there. So that's the idea for funding, and then also actually just, of course, raising some money from Gitcoin and from other, maybe potentially the Common Stack raise if we need to, once we figure out exactly what we need to spend money on and what we can get away with just impact hours. So, but we're looking good. I actually think that we have, once we can get people to understand what we're doing, which is building a DAO, building some smart contracts, that will be a bonding curve to, I think we'll end up, I think we're on a good pace to get this thing launched by December. I have a nice roadmap mapped out, and things are looking good. I'm going to have a call with Luke tomorrow to kind of figure out exactly what he needs from a technical specification, because we're at the stage where we can start writing a spec for the Gardens template. The goal is just to use whatever's there, maybe add in the few little pieces that we need, like the hatch. I don't know if the hatch is actually there, but that's a pretty simple smart contract, and finding out what those other little simple smart contracts are. And then, of course, we still need to, we did all the processes for our build phase, how do we make decisions within the build phase? How do we, work together? And now that that's done, now we can do that for TE Commons token holders, right? And so this is right. These are the processes that it's gone, and it's definitely been a challenge getting people to collaborate actively. But I'm hoping that with impact hours here, now that we've already quantified a round, and we're going to do the next round next week, so. people will start recognizing that they're being rewarded for their work, and then hopefully that will they're already being acknowledged with praise, but hopefully being rewarded with impact hours and understanding what they mean will get people to actually commit time.
Right.
So that's the plan. Things look good though. We have every week, Livia and I kind of go back and look at all the things that went wrong and take notes and try to get it ready for the next round too. So many things that we did wrong in this cultural build, we didn't come up with a decision-making process until a month and a half in. It was really bad. There's certain things that we need to move sooner and things that we can move later, and that kind of stuff. So
that makes sense. But I mean, that's at the end of the day, part of this is about understanding that building communities and building organizations and building even institutions is not a just drag and drop or copy paste type process, and that people who've learned to develop and create things like software and products, etc., also need to learn to think about the exercises of building and maintaining communities in a similar light, where you just got to start, but then you got to be prepared to learn and iterate and sort of evolve as individuals, as organizations, in addition to through the infrastructures, the tools, etc.
Yeah. And it's just a process for us, and after we do it once, we'll be able to do it really easily the next time, and even better the next time, and better the next time.
Yeah. So I think there's something to be said for, and again, this is totally up to you guys how you use your team resources, but there's something to be said for being really forward about taking your own learnings, and whether it's writing an article or whether it's however you would do it, AMA for all that it matters, saying hey, we fucked some stuff up. We learned some cool stuff. Here's what we fucked up, and here's what we learned. Try to create that knowledge so that other people don't have to make the same mistakes before they get those learnings.
Exactly. Use case, just a use case study, a user study or whatever you call that. So that's the TC. I don't know if there's any things that I know you want to basically stay kind of farther away from it, but I don't know if there's anything that you're interested in.
It's not necessarily about wanting to stay away. I mean, I have some opinions. First opinion is if I'm too heavy-handed, I undermine the process because there's still too much. I have my opinion is supported for it being my opinion in a way that I think is not actually conducive to sort of the process I want to see emerge. Not that it would be bad, I would just have to regulate myself. And I am kind of doing that. I'm just doing it I'm regulating myself in a heavy-handed way by just checking in periodically, doing little bursts of work, but really focusing more on trying to do things that contribute than doing things that govern, because in a lot of ways I set a lot of these balls in motion and I need to let them roll. And maybe I can step in and push them one direction or another if I think they're rolling off the tracks. But I'm keeping in mind that I don't actually want to keep them on a tight spread. They need to have room to sort of veer off a bit and course correct a bit. And a conversation like this with you is I'm giving you my feedback at the level of, instead of me course correcting it, I'm giving you my thoughts so that maybe you guys can try to course correct. And obviously that's not non-participation, but it's sort of I'm trying to participate through. I had a couple conversations with Shebnem. I told her similar stuff. I have a couple conversations with you. I'll tell you similar stuff. But by not broadcasting it to the group, I'm making sure that those discussions get met on their own merits and through the lenses of different people, rather than a sort of de facto stepping in and proposing a solution and people going, oh, well, if Zargam says this is the solution, then, which I worry is still a risk with this particular community.
For sure. Okay. Well, if there's anything that you want to especially pay close attention to, that you want me to keep you updated on.
I dropped some new channels in the Discord with Barada. They are meant to be design pattern specific channels, which you might notice both the conviction voting and the bonding curves are in there, although I just dropped some of the existing files. The idea is that as we continue to look at these design patterns, similar to our discussions today, we want people to both people to come ask questions there, and if early on, maybe I'm the one answering them or other people with more familiarity are answering them, it will create, the people who we answered them for will know the answers to answer for them for people in the future. So they create a sort of, it's a very minor move, but a lot of that stuff already exists, and turns out that people come and don't know even where to go ask those questions. And Barada had said that he's fielding a lot more questions about conviction voting.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really nice to try to funnel that to a place, and we decided that the right place to funnel those questions is to the TE community in a channel for it, because we want the TE community who has the best understanding of token engineering design patterns to ultimately, maybe in the first pass, the questions aren't being answered by them, but by the second or third time the same question gets answered, almost anyone in the TE community can answer them.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of builds the rapport of that community. So we only just made those channels.
Whatever happened with creds? Is it just paused, or is it still going?
It doesn't. I think it's running. So here's the issue. I instantiated it, but it was more of a, hey,